Hello there, and welcome to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. This is episode 14, where we are discussing Herzog's Masterclass, lesson 15. And with me, as always, is Mr. Cullen McFader. What's up, buddy?
Hello. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. It's another beautiful day out here in Orange County, California. What's it like up there near Toronto, sir?
Well, it's dipped down temperature-wise. It's gotten a lot colder. It was really warm last week, very nice.
I figured this will be a new part of the podcast where we'll it's our weather forecast, or not forecast, but it'll be like let's paint a picture. We'll we can so people can really feel like they're here with us. Get
some warm apple cider. And I've got some construction going on outside, which is perfectly appropriate for the sound episode.
Absolutely, that's right. So this one is covering sound. That's lesson 15, and I think this one is going. Look, they're all important, but I think this one is going to be a really, really important topic, especially for people who may be just starting out, making their own films. Because Herzog talks about it. He starts this lesson right off the bat with, the first few films he ever made, he couldn't even ever show to an audience because he had unfortunately neglected the sound quality. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I have. Some of the first short things, the sound was just, sadly, it just broke the film. And I think, for us visual thinkers, many of whom, that's why we've kind of gone into filmmaking, the first most, foremost thing on your mind is the visual. And until you kind of learn otherwise through a few, trial and error mistake runs, that actually, people are much, much, much more tolerant of visual artifacting or issues than they are of sound issues.
Oh, yeah. I always find it funny, too, if you think about the documentary that we shot together in California. The sound on that is really nice. I think that we did a really great job of making sure that was great. And we had a nice camera, too. But we could have shot that on an iPhone. I think as long as the sound is nice, I think people will buy into it. Whereas, vice versa, had we just sat an iPhone on the table and been recording audio that way and had really beautiful visuals, people are going to turn that off. I used to do a lot of sound design for theater. And I remember when I was being trained for that, the guy who was training me basically said, and this is something that I think carries a lot into film, people will go into a theater and watch a play in the dark, but they will not go into a theater and watch a play where they can't hear what the actors are saying.
Absolutely.
And so I think that really put it into words.
And, that's a good way to put, and of course, I will not be able to reference these studies specifically, sadly, but I do recall having read, that there are kind of, scientific studies that show that people are definitely have a higher capacity for visual static or artifacting or, whatever you may want to term, basically poor video quality. But we have a very low tolerance to poor sound quality. And you can even see this in, the mediums that have been used to distribute films throughout history, right? People didn't have much of a problem watching VHS tapes or beta, if you happen to, be in those part of the worlds where people use beta. But sound was surprisingly decent. Especially there were tape video formats that actually had digital audio. Were very good quality. But I think
a really pertinent perhaps comparison is you look at the Michael Mann what's it called, Miami Vice.
Okay. Oh, now now you're talking about TV show or film?
Film with Jamie Foxx.
With Jamie and Colin Farrell, if I do believe, right?
And so you look at that, and that movie was digital. And they intentionally,
because Michael Mann was definitely an early adopter
of digital, and he pushed the ISO on those digital cameras really high to get noise, which is usually what people try to avoid. But if you watch that movie, it's noisy as hell. It's incredibly noisy.
Yes,
it's an example, and I actually think it really works for the movie. But there's a lot of people that don't like it.
Well, he's got a handful of films that are terribly noisy. What was the other film that he made with Tom Cruise? I actually think it's one of his best films, where Tom Cruise is a hitman, and I think Collateral. I think he used a Phantom in that, if I'm not mistaken.
For the whole thing.
For the whole thing.
But you look at that. That's an example of intentionally pushing visual technology to a point that it's not necessarily usually used. You're experimenting with it. Whereas then you look at Tenet, which just came out, the Christopher Nolan, newest Nolan one, where he tried to experiment with sound by
which Nolan's
reducing
been known
the dialogue.
to do. Yeah.
And everyone's complaining. Critics, audience,
Well,
everyone sort of said, like, I can't hear anything. And so it's like you can experiment with one. You can't really...
It's difficult.
It's difficult to experiment in a way of you can definitely experiment with sound.
Well,
but in a way
legibility is an issue for sure.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to have a pretty vivid memory of Interstellar also had significant issues or complaints in theaters. Nolan had really specifically, he specifically mixed that film. And isn't this right? And he, had very specific instruction for how it was supposed to be. The sound was supposed to be replicated in theaters. Now, I remember seeing that film, and I actually saw it at a screening in Los Angeles. I don't recall the theater now because this has been, the film is like a decade old already.
So
it's crazy. But Nolan was there. He did a Q&A. It was one of the first screenings of the film. And I remember thinking to myself, I can hardly understand a damn word.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was so much of that ultra low frequency, there was so much bass, and there was so much dialogue that was underneath sound effects.
And I think that's the thing, is that sound is, weirdly enough, even though it's not something that you can like physically see, sound is a lot less subjective than visuals.
When it comes to being able to tolerate,
exactly. It's
legibility,
like you can. And there's all these things as well where sound is an instant reaction. A lot of people say if you're cutting to a beat of a song, the visual should be cut a frame before the beat in the song, because our minds will
process
the sound faster. Exactly.
Right.
So it's almost there's this different reaction in our brains to sound, which is, of course, we're getting very scientific here, but I think it's really important to understand these elements because...
Agreed.
I love experimenting. I always said that experimenting with sound is very, very similar to experimenting with visual effects, like practical visual effects. You think of how they used to make, and we'll get into that. And we're going to get into that detail, but it's really interesting.
And I think it's an area where it's there's a little bit less. At least for the amateur or kind of like up and coming filmmaker, I think there's so much opportunity there. To really explore using sound as another, as a, not just, okay, I'm going to get it right, but to really, take that and turn it into something stylistic and artistic and adding to the storytelling. But let's
it's one of the few it's one of the few aspects of film, however, though, that has to be high quality.
It does. I agree.
It's one of these things where it's like there's such a quality barrier on sound that you often, people will forgive, again, if you can't afford a great camera and you shoot on a Canon Rebel, people will forgive that for the merit of the film, whereas people are a lot less forgiving if the mics are scratchy and there's wind and all this.
There's no question. So, but thankfully, as Herzog talks about in this lesson, we do live in an era where not only has camera technology and editing technology increased in capability and decreased in cost, but of course, so has audio quality or audio equipment, right? And so, right now I'm recording using a Rode boom mic that I actually use often when I'm shooting. I'm recording with a Tascam D70. It's just a little bitty tiny external digital 4-track recorder here that's XLR input with phantom power. It's extremely easy to use. I don't recall it being... I've owned it now for, probably 4 years, some odd. I don't remember how much it cost, but I remember it being quite cost effective and practical. There are, thankfully, there are tools available now where you can get good quality sound without having to break the bank. So that's awesome.
Yeah, the excuses are running out, essentially. But I think it's really, but it is really pertinent, I think, to say, because unlike Herzog's first few movies, or even the first few movies that you made, or even, even though it's much more recently, the first few movies that I made, there was such a lack of availability for not only being able to do things over, but just being able to edit sound. And
Absolutely.
Nowadays it's so available, and there's even new, I think Zoom just released their new recorder that records in 32-bit audio. It's kind of blew me away, because it's you're able to, rather than, I know yours records at a dual frequency, so you get the higher...
Correct. You've got a 3 decibel cut on the
whereas
second.
the newest Zoom, I can't remember what the number is, but it actually records in 32 bits, so it's much like RAW, where you actually, it's not just two different audio files recording. The entire scope of the sound is recorded, so even if it peaks, you can bring it down and you can recover
much
peaks,
greater manipulation.
and
yeah.
it's incredible. I saw this video demonstration of it. It's really remarkable.
That's fantastic. I'm going to have to look into that. It's funny. I was actually just on Zoom's product page earlier today, just checking out kind of the latest and greatest in some of those smaller digital recorders, and I did not note that, but I will go back and check that out. I mean, yes, I am much older than you. It's true. And so, yeah, I mean, for, so many of the short films that I made, of which I can't even count, and most of them are gone. And I think, many of us kind of learn this way, right? I was lucky enough to have a camcorder in the family. And so I began making films for myself and my friends and my parents when I was young. But there was never any way for me to extract audio from visual. I mean, it was only on camera mic, and I could never take the audio away from the video, and I couldn't add to it, and I couldn't subtract from it, not in any real practical sense. So, being able to, the technology we have now makes that so within the grasp of almost any filmmaker. It really does just, I mean, it just blows things open for
And I think
people to be able to do.
Because sound is so much more difficult to grasp than visuals, like as a child even, you can kind of get the feeling of what makes a movie look like a movie. It's the lighting, it's the really nice cameras, things like that. And you can kind of replicate that even if you have, a high-8 video recorder. But sound is so much more difficult because you don't really get to see the result or the process. And I think, I didn't learn in depth, how sound worked probably till I went to a summer camp, a film summer camp that was, taught by industry professionals, and that's actually where I teach a lot of things now. But
wait a minute, Cullen, I'm getting an idea. Horror film, summer video camp.
There you go, exactly. Oh, believe me, we've made plenty.
I'm sure.
But I mean, that's what I mean is that it took me getting to getting in touch with an industry professional to learn about what sound was, versus it took me watching Jurassic Park and Jaws to learn about, the visual storytelling. So
let's
it's
talk
such
about
a huge
that.
difference. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that some. So it's like, we've beat this dead horse. Sound is vital, and I think more vital even than the visual, frankly. So let's talk about some ways that then, if you're just starting out, you can get there. Let's talk about some ways that we've done this. I mean, Herzog, suggest, okay, hey, well, you got to learn the basics. Now, again, with other, we've talked about this in other episodes. As a director, you are not going to be the master of every single area of filmmaking, but you certainly need to learn the basics. And I, for example, I would readily admit, I would never do my own sound recording on anything other than an exercise that I might be shooting, or some rare exception if I'm doing some industrials or something and it's very simple. I'm there, shooting an interview, and yes, I'll record my own sound there. That's not a big deal. But if I'm shooting a film, I would always have somebody whose expertise lies in that area to do that. But what are some ways that you found effective then for kind of learning the basics for sound in your experience?
I mean, as I said, there's software that you can get now that's free. DaVinci has Fairlight built in, which is an incredible sound mixing software.
I've been meaning to try that. Yeah.
Just go out. Things are so available now. To even again, when I was a kid, they weren't.
Now, is Fairlight in the free distribution?
Yeah, it's in the free Resolve. As far as I know, it's in the free Resolve. Yeah.
Okay,
I've never actually used the free one, but I'm pretty sure that it is.
Not to digress, I use Audition. Not to get too in the weeds here. Is Fairlight? You have experience with that? It's something you recommend?
Yes, Fairlight's great. Fairlight, because the thing is that again, as you said, not to get too into the weeds, but Fairlight was a separate audio software entirely that DaVinci or Blackmagic bought and put into
and then incorporated.
Resolve. Yeah. So it wasn't like they just kind of built their own and put it in there half-assed. It was actually quite an established.
So you can start to learn the software. Some of the things to even kind of step back even further from learning kind of technical aspects, but learning from kind of starting to understand more about sound, and kind of starting to lead a little bit more with your ear as opposed to just your eyes when you're filmmaking. I mean, some of the stuff that I've done, and I find it quite enjoyable too. So maybe I'm weird, is that way back when DVDs first came out, I was blown away by the fact that I could strip the audio off the DVDs and make an MP3. And I would often do that. I would strip the audio from my favorite films and then just listen to them.
And I remember you mentioning that to me because you mentioned THX is a great one to do.
Yeah, it is. THX is an excellent film to do that with. And so, I'm completely focused on the sound, and it really is amazing, especially with a good set of headphones on. You've got a good DVD audio rip. It really allows you to focus on, of course, not just the soundtrack, but the Foley work, the dialogue record. I mean, it's just amazing how much you can focus on it, as opposed to just watching the flick in your living room. I highly recommend it.
And the conversation's another great one too, which Coppola and,
sure,
Lucas were very, very forward on the sound. They kind of were pioneers of new sound technology.
I mean, I would highly recommend, take whatever your favorite films. So everybody, anybody out there, take your favorite film. And, I just did it that way because I wanted to have the audio portably on my phone. I could listen to headphones. Of course, you can, just put the audio on some source and just not watch the video if you don't want to go through the trouble of actually extracting the audio track. But I highly recommend, and go do it like an A/B. Just listen to the audio and then go back and just watch the video.
Well, very similarly too. I think one thing that taught me so much about sound when I was kind of starting out was, and this is something that I use with the students that I teach, is make a short film centered around sound, and then do one edit of it where everything is entirely post. All the sound is either Foley that you've recorded
or ADR
separately or ADR.
Okay.
And then do another one where you try to use everything that was on set
location.
Recorded and on location. And I think that you're very rarely going to come into a situation where you're making your own thing and you have to choose one or the other. But I think it really, at least to me, gave me both with the one that was all post sound, gave me a chance to really experiment. And I still use that strategy in things that I do today. But the one that was in all location sound taught me, okay, what did I miss here? If I only had this to work with, how can I go back and do it better next time? Because did the mic bump something, or was the input too low? Was it, all this different stuff that you can really kind of gauge just from doing that. And it becomes really fun. And even just, Herzog mentions in his Masterclass going outside with a microphone to a forest and spending a night there and recording. But, just do it around your house, do it in your backyard. And that's kind of what I mean when I said that I find Foley especially very similar to those old style VFX, where it's like you're just experimenting. You're just looking for new ways to create different sounds, and which I think is really fun. I used to actually want to be a Foley artist. That was kind of my
that's awesome.
My desire as a kid to work in Foley.
Well, it is a fantastic. I've seen documentaries, of course. Once again, I can't remember the names, but I've seen some great pieces, whether it's featurettes or docs on Foley artist, and it really is truly an extraordinary art form, frankly, and it's, I think, really underappreciated. It's one of those things that if you're just kind of a casual, or even even a little bit more than just a casual film watcher, if you've not really made a lot of films, you start to realize how interestingly that very real sounds won't play as real when you've actually, it's just amazing how sometimes it's actually these Foley sounds or what an audience expects things to sound like, and if you have a realistic sound, it's not going to play. It's just very interesting sometimes how that goes. But
and he does mention that sort of when he talks about the encounters at the end of the world, and he talks about how they this, and that kind of gets into this whole idea of diegetic versus extradiegetic sound. What's the sound that you put in? And I mean that's somewhat related.
Well, let's explain.
Technically within, sure.
So let's explain just for people who don't. So go ahead. So diegetic is where you.
So diegetic is basically any sound that is within the scene. So you put it pretty well, which was like a radio playing, or
Right.
sounds
It's in the
of
scene.
footsteps,
We see a
or birds.
radio,
Yeah.
right, and it's in the room, and we hear the music from the radio.
Yeah,
Everything
and
else
then
is
extradiegetic.
yeah,
So extradiegetic is sound that you can basically say the characters can't hear, or that nobody
right.
within
That's
the
a great
world
way
could
to put
hear.
it.
So
Yeah.
soundtrack, but there are also sound effects that can be extradiegetic. Like in Saving Private Ryan, when that opening scene on the beach, when Tom Hanks kind of gets shell shocked, and you've got all those like
And
crazy sounds going on, that it sort of sounds like a kettle
Yeah.
reaching its kind of climax, and that would be considered extradiegetic, even though it's implying that Tom Hanks, that's kind of what his emotional sensory is.
Right.
There's no kettle on the beach there.
Right, right.
It's very much it's using
It's
the
interesting.
sound
I have
to-
never kind of correlated that sound to a kettle, but I do remember that and I don't know if Saving Private Ryan was the first film to do this, but I felt like I've seen so many films after that used that effect of shock, and then
and it's
kind of
muted,
coming back to well, so let's talk a little bit about some more of these things. I mean, I think Herzog talks about the importance of paying attention to sound when you're scouting locations. He talks about, he tells the story about, which is like wild. Of course, like every time Herzog tells a story, I'm like, of course they would try that. Like, he talks about that soaking the floorboards of this room in order to be able to shoot there without having the floors creaking so much that you could, that they couldn't get on location sound. It's hysterical. I don't think he says that didn't end up working, but it proves it, or it speaks to a really important point. I can't tell you how many times that I've been on a shoot, at many times as an actor, and this location's been scouted, and not enough attention was paid to the fact that, let's say, like it's an apartment or something, and you can't control the HVAC, or it's right next to a highway, or it's right under an airport. Just the neighbors are the walls are paper thin, and you can hear the neighbors right through the wall, and you have no way of controlling the neighbors. I mean, certainly these things are important, and Herzog rightly points out that it's vital when you're scouting locations to have these things in mind, because it can really make or break a shoot. There's no question.
And especially with things like documentaries, sometimes you may not even get to scout.
For sure.
Again, we shooting that documentary in LA. We shot in that school, and
the studio, right?
The studio is technically a studio, yeah. And it had a streetcar going down below that kind of honked every few minutes. And I do remember we actually almost recorded the interview as well with the air conditioning, and then right before we started, we both sort of went, "Oh, air conditioning," and it was like this really quick thing. But again, it's things like that you immediately you can't hesitate on it. Like, we couldn't have possibly gone, "Oh, maybe we should do this or that." Yeah. All we have to do is kind of embrace it, and then we can go, well, maybe if it's so low, maybe we actually put in city sound effects behind that so it sounds intentional.
Sure.
Or something like that.
Like, great example of
so
getting
many
creative.
ways that you can, exactly, just get creative with it.
And this sparks to mind an idea too. When I'm scouting a location for sound, I'm trying to ascertain what the sound situation is. I use a mic that I'm going to be using and my headset. That's how I
walk around with it.
Just because it's amazing how different that experience is going to be than if you're just walking around with your unaided ears. It will be a significantly different experience. So I highly recommend, if when you really want to get a sense of what something sounds like, take one of your primary microphones, run it through your amp, your recorder, and use the headset use a good quality headset. And I think it'll give you a much more accurate representation of what's going to actually end up in your recording, as opposed to just your naked ears.
Exactly.
So you talked about, we're talking about, all different kinds of stuff, diegetic versus extradiegetic, talking about using sound as an effect. Let's also talk a little bit about ADR and location sound. Now, this is not something that Herzog speaks to directly or much. I mean, he talks about the importance of getting on location sound, but of course, ADR is a thing. It exists, and it's a tool that can be profoundly helpful, but may have its own pros and cons. So let's talk about that.
Now, I mean, I think that there's kind of a stigma about there's this really bad line, let's fix it in post or whatever that would get you thrown off any set. But I do think that people often think that it's one or the other. And I think that the best and the most efficient sets, and the sets that usually get the best results that I've seen and actually worked on personally, have been the ones that do very much marry those two. And, don't stress about if the location sounds not perfect, because there are very many ways to, slap myself on the wrist, but there are many ways to fix it in post, for the lack of a better term.
And we'll take a step back here. Now, this is always, I'm not going to even lie. I had to look this up. I always forget this because the name has kind of gotten a little bit stretched from it's used to just mean any after the fact audio recording for dialogue. But ADR stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement. And most of us as small independent filmmakers, this isn't going to be automated in any real way. You're going to have to actually do this kind of tediously. Unless you've got some budget to go into a studio that does this. But that just means that you, for whatever reason, you are recording dialogue to dub in over the video you've recorded and replace whatever audio or dialogue was recorded there on location, just in case there was any question about that. And so you're saying you think, hey, this is a tool. It's in the toolbox. A lot of people flip out, don't use it. But that it actually can be really helpful.
Oh, yeah. I've used it many times. I tried not to. If I can get great sound on location, I very much prefer that. But I think that if it's done well, people can't notice. And that's the goal, right?
That's the goal. I think it's, it's certainly, you said, look, I try to do everything I can to not have to ADR. And that's absolutely, my preference is certainly to get the performance live there in the moment. That's probably one of the most challenging things to have to do, is to try to replicate the exact same level and tone of the performance in a booth. The actor is removed from the scene. They're usually just by themselves. They're not going to be acting against other people. They're going to have to be watching a replay of their performance to match their timing of their original delivery so that the lips sync up with the sound.
The energy is so different.
It's very, very, very difficult. So ideally you're not having to do much of that, but it really can save your butt, and sometimes it is just frankly necessary. So definitely a valuable tool. It's challenging to do, I think, on your own without the proper technical tools to do it easily, but it can definitely be done. It can definitely be done.
Use a closet. That'll be my piece of advice. If you don't have a place to record, just literally, closets are so great because they're so insulated with sound. And because you got coats and whatever hanging up, just sit there.
You Canadians have coats and everything.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, stick some, some parkas in there. So. But no,
we just have shorts and t-shirts down here, man.
Yeah. And that's what I will say though, that it is much more, it's kind of ironic because, again, sound has such a high barrier for quality that people will accept. But I will also say it is easier to, if you know what you're doing, it is easier to replicate the sound quality of a blockbuster motion picture than it is to replicate the visual quality of a blockbuster. And that's kind of where it sounds counterintuitive, because it's like, well, if people think that the quality of sound matters way more, how could that be? But if you do a good job on sound, you can get perfect sound with low end equipment. Not low end, of course. It depends. There's a barrier in terms of like if the equipment actually just sucks. But with consumer grade equipment that is high quality, you can easily get, not easily, I keep saying easily, but with the skill put in and the time put in, you can get the quality to match that of something that you would see as a big studio film. Whereas with visuals, it can be 10 times more difficult to actually match that kind of element if you were trying to get it to look like it's a big budget or whatever.
Right. Well, I certainly, I like I said, I'm not an expert. And the only mastering that I've really done was stereo. I don't have experience with surround sound, 5.1, 7.1, ultra low end frequencies. There are so many. I mean, I'll frankly admit that I am not even remotely an expert, but I do understand the importance of it. And certainly you've got to carve out budget for that. And, and find somebody who has an expertise in it. I am not, but it's fascinating to me. I have on a feature film, a horror film that I was a part of a while back. I was brought in to help assist the interactions between the guy or the team that was mastering everything, doing the sound design, and providing feedback. And it was a really eye-opening experience. It's not stuff that, at that high of a level, it's not something that I would have ever done myself. I have great respect for people who are experts in that. But really, just the level of, what you can do with sound design. And you had spoken to this too, where you're talking about sound is an effect. And we've talked, you've got location sound, ADR. We talked a little bit about Foley. It's just it's really a cool place to play in as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
and and we haven't even talked too much about this, which is stylistically using sound. Herzog in this lesson talks about blending and distorting sounds for stylization. And here for the past 30 minutes we've been talking about just kind of recording sound properly. We've hardly
the technicalities,
right. We haven't even touched base on using sound artistically, stylistically. Herzog talks about, he mentions a couple examples from his film Signs of Life, where he has the distorted applause with, I don't even know how to describe this. How would you call it when a wire like twangs almost like when you...
it's like
what would you call it?
I don't even know.
I don't even know, but it's like a guitar string. Imagine, you have these high power, like high tension lines. They kind of have this like doing, but that was horrible. I can't believe I just did that. I just went doing, but I think people get the idea. But how he combined these sounds with the scene of the kind of famous scene of the sea of windmills. And then he mentions another film, Encounters at the End of the World, where he has this poor scientist who's, half of her face froze off, lays down on the ice, and he uses this wild, I think he actually uses the term like Pink Floyd-esque or something. But I remember
he describes it very much like the Dark Side of the Moon.
And I don't remember it personally being too much like Pink Floyd, but I feel you. I get it. But
maybe it's just a word for crazy, weird,
or psychedelic or something. I don't know. Yeah, hey, I love Floyd, and Dark Side of the Moon is, I think, one of the greatest rock albums to ever have been recorded. But yeah, so he mentions those examples, and I know there are many more in his filmography. Now, this is definitely an area that I have not explored anywhere near to the level that I've explored some other aspects of filmmaking. So this was kind of an inspiration to me, and just a reminder of, hey, there's this whole other area here where it's not just about recording accurately at a high level of competence of cleanliness and resolution, but there's just this whole world of style of design available to you. There's so many things. You can translate. We talk about often the nuance and subtlety of mise-en-scène manipulation, that you can use just all these layers of storytelling density visually. We talk about how you can manipulate these things to elicit, profound emotional response. And like sound is probably even more so. You talked about how it's almost a more primal, right? You never stop listening. When you sleep, you've stopped watching, but you never stop hearing. It's such a primal, I can't, it's like the amount of time, like you had said, the amount of time it takes for a sound to go from your ear to your brain is, I think, considerably less than it takes to get from your eye to your brain. Yeah. Even though we're very visual creatures, this is such a primal, emotionally connected
because visuals are more complex. Where sound is usually very, very simple, even if it is, a created, complicated.
Well, it's evolutionary, right?
Exactly.
It's like you're asleep on the plains of Africa, and you hear some rustling.
Hear a lion. Yeah.
It's like boom. Not that I'm ever going to pretend to be evolutionary science or scientist or whatever you would call that. But yeah, and so there's just it's just awesome to me, again, to be reminded for myself that, hey, there's this whole other world here.
And it's funny because I actually, again, like I said, this was kind of where a lot of my interest used to lie, and still does, just less career oriented. But back when I was younger, I really, really wanted to do sound experimentation and Foley and all that design for a living. And I think that, it can be as simple as just it's just like everything in film is about, a lot of it's about manipulation. And I think that, an example being that the Hitchcock short that I just made, there's a moment where there's a character who's entering a house to kill another character, and they're walking up the stairs, and their main character is waiting at the top of the stairs, and it's dark and you can't see the person, but you can hear them coming up the stairs. And there's, I think, like 10 steps on the staircase. And those 10 steps were done instantly on the day. It doesn't take that long to climb 10 steps, but I basically extended it to like 20 steps of this like creaking coming up the stairs. So, and I think that, again, that kind of is where it's like, it doesn't have to be realistic. You can use it, and same with there's the famous scene in The Godfather when Michael shoots the police captain and the mafioso in the little cafe. And in that, there's this sound of the subway going above the restaurant, and the subway sound cuts to silence as soon as Michael pulls the trigger, and you still hear the other sounds, you still hear footsteps and stuff like that, but it's utilizing, again, that's kind of where this diegetic versus extradiegetic comes in, where you're utilizing diegetic sound in an extradiegetic fashion to emphasize. And it doesn't have to be, again, you can, very rarely are sound effects in film, even if they're supposed to replicate real life, very rarely are they exactly replicating real life. They're usually exaggerated in some way. Exactly.
And that's where I was kind of saying that, if you just use the literal sound of what was happening, it's just funny because we've kind of all inherited this grammar of film, which also includes Foley work and sound effects. It doesn't seem, quote unquote, even real, even if you're going for a realistic effect, much less a stylized effect, it'll come off so flat. And some of these things get exaggerated to kind of ridiculousness. Like sometimes it's hysterical to think of like, the sounds of like a fist hitting somebody's face.
Is actually a baseball bat hitting a leather jacket or something like that. And I mean, I've done that. I had a horror movie where someone had to be being gouged by this demon. And we used,
Cullen, this is such violent subject matter.
It's just all in. But we used a watermelon. We were like scraping out a watermelon. And even the sound of the monster was like my dog's breathing slowed down to like 50% or 20% or something like that. So we just, again, and that's that's kind of where I describe it as being very similar to visual effects, old style visual effects, where it's like you can go out and record your dog, drinking water and slow it down to 5% and see how that sounds. And then go, oh no, that's not right. And then go back out and get something else, play it back, play around with it. It's a lot of fun.
This reminds me. I mean, gosh, I really hope my memory serves here because it has been a very long time. But if I'm, of course, it's like pretty common that you'll find commentary tracks will have the director, obviously, often producers, certainly often, lead actors. So it's very rare that you get a commentary track where you've got somebody who was, one of the heads of the sound department, whether they were, overall kind of sound design or whatever it might have been. It's very rare. But if I'm not mistaken, don't the original Star Wars films, at least like the New Hope, isn't there a commentary track from the sound designer?
From Ben Burtt? There probably is. I wouldn't be surprised, because Ben Burtt was definitely one of the pioneers of
like I said, it's been a while, but I mean, I remember being blown away by the detail where he described, the blending of different sounds, how he would go out and record all of these sounds and blend them together to make everything from, the creature
and I'm pretty sure Ben Burtt
to
did
lightsaber.
THX as well. I'm pretty sure he also did the sound for THX, yeah.
And so, anyway, I was just going to say I would totally recommend seeking those out because they really are extraordinary. It's a little, couple-hour long film schools here that are specific to sound and should be readily available, I would imagine. But
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, it's just it really is. I kind of get excited again because it's an area that I personally have not explored anywhere as much as I could, and so. Trying to push myself to utilize that more in my upcoming projects, to really be more conscientious from the very beginning, pre-production. It's always so worried about the script, and I'm always so worried about the cast and all these other things. And of course you should be, but as much as I can sit here and say sound is so vital, I mean, it still does fall lower than it probably should on my list of priorities. So
I mean, that's the thing, is it's especially on set. It's the first thing, and it's really unfortunate, but it's the first thing to kind of go out the window when things are running, behind schedule.
Yeah.
And which is ironic because it's arguably the key thing that you need to keep kind of on top of.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I will say, and this takes a huge amount of understanding, and it should never be a light decision. But there also is the argument that sound is, in a way, one of the easier elements to do over. Whereas if there's, a boom in the shot or something goes wrong visually, visual effects are so expensive, whereas, retaking sound for Foley or whatever is a fraction of that cost of visual effects or painting things out.
Can be. Yeah. I do on a project that I was a part of, though. Well, I mean, we had to ADR so much of it that
that just became so expensive
that it actually ended up being almost prohibited the film from any kind of release. Thankfully, we overcame the challenge, and I was a very small piece of that film, and I think it's a really killer little horror film, and it came out quite nice. But it took a very long period of time, and I think considerable money to repair this issue. So, but I think also too, we used that as an opportunity as well to modify performance, modify some dialogue. So there was a little bit of, I would say, quote unquote, editing that was done, which is of course something else you can do with ADR, right? I mean, you can literally change the script. You can modify performances. Hopefully you're not having to do that. Certainly you shouldn't be shooting thinking you're going to do that later. But hey, things happen, and it is a tool that's available to you. I just, I think we've covered just about everything. In the lesson, but I just want to point out one thing. I've got this in my notes, and it doesn't have anything to do with sound, but I just love it. Do you remember back I forget now, it's a few lessons ago, we're talking about cameras, and we're talking about how Herzog hates to have a zoom, actually use a zoom in as a shot where we literally see the zoom. He's like, hey, I love zoom lenses because I can recompose on the fly, and they're especially fantastic for documentary filmmaking, but I don't ever want to show a zoom. I'm 99% sure, if my memory is serving me, that in Encounters at the End of the World, the example he gives for blending and distorting sounds for stylization, there is in fact a zoom shot there.
Yeah, there's that there. There's a few. There actually are a few things that I could point out that Herzog does use as zoom.
I just love
in
it.
Camera.
And pointing this out is absolutely not in any way to say, oh, he contradicts himself, so everything he says is
that's all wrong.
Is garbage. To me, it's actually super endearing. I love the fact that he kind of contradicts himself, and I think it just goes to show that that there are just so many avenues of application for in filmmaking and in all of these areas. There's just such a wonderful sandbox for exploration. So but good stuff.
Excellent.
Well, Cullen, I think we've come to the end of another episode. Everybody out there in podcast listening land, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know that I have. Cullen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And until next time. Oh wait, but before I say until next time, I have to say let's give a little sneak peek of what next time is going to be. So next episode, we're going to be talking about lesson 16, which is an extension of sound, music.
Yeah. which is
So,
super, super pertinent to at least what I do. So,
well, fantastic. I can't wait to discuss it. This is going to be another exciting one. All right. Well, until then, everybody, take care.